This week on Dig Me Out.
You shoot me in the head. You burn my house in bed. You kick me when I'm dead. You fill me full of dread. Then you crush my head.
With your hosts, Jason Diaz and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Speaking of the union, Jay, we have a returning union member. I don't remember what he picked last year, but I know it was something that we listened to. That's the worst possible segue.
It was Black
Sounds of
Lab,
Wayne.
right?
It was Black
It was
Lab.
Oh,
No.
that sounds Wayne. Black Lab was the year before, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay. See, I lost my list of everybody. I used to use the website as the way I would keep track of everybody, what they picked, and we don't have that anymore. I don't think that capability. So I need to figure out a way to keep track of that now. Jay.
We recently had on James Barber, who I think did A&R for that Black Lab album, so that's why it was on my mind.
Got it. So last year was Fountains of Wayne. The year before that was Black Lab. Mike Bankhead, welcome back to the show. What are you bringing to us this year?
Swimmer, the only album I've ever heard that they made. It is called Surreal. And I don't really know anything about this band, so I'm looking forward to you educating me on it.
Oh, brother. Well, there's not a lot, but I'll do my best. Jay, had you heard of the band Swimmer before this?
I did not. I'm kind of surprised, from a sound standpoint. Even just Maverick was kind of big news at that time with all the bands they were signing in the late 90s. So I'm kind of surprised it didn't get on my radar. But no, I hadn't heard it.
Yeah, me as well. I had not heard of the band, which is a lot of people in the comments, both on Patreon and on Discord, were familiar with the band. And in fact, our friend Chip Midnight has a copy that he shared with us in the Discord, but I had not heard of them or heard them. So I did do some research. It's very thin on what I discovered.
History of the band.
But yes, one record, the lineup for the album and for the band in general was Andy McCarron on vocals. He covered the backing vocals too, and then he played some rhythm guitar. And Andy is spelled like Andy with an extra A between the D and the Y. On lead guitar is Jeff Thal. On bass guitar is James Elliott. And on drums is Chad Royce. It was produced by Andy McCarron with Dave Jordan. Now, you probably know Dave Jordan because he worked with like Jane's Addiction and Red Hot Chili Peppers and a bunch of other bands throughout the 80s and 90s that people would know. And it was mixed by Ben Gross and someone named Lumpy for a couple tracks. Released on the aforementioned Maverick Records in 1999. And what's interesting is that this is a band that had a bidding war. So I found an interview with Andy McCarron from back in the day. They were from New York, and they formed in 98 and put together a demo tape pretty quickly. And what's interesting is that Maverick was not based out of New York. They're actually California based, I guess. And so they had 11 different record labels like woo them, take them out to dinner. Maverick was not one of them. And Andy McCarron was like, well, we need to figure out a way to get Maverick interested. So he basically like looked at Maverick and said, that's the best opportunity for us. And like you said, Jay, Maverick was doing a lot of interesting things in the mid to late 90s. So that, I guess that kind of makes sense. If you were an alternative rock band and you didn't want to go with like a major, but you wanted to go with a label that had some backing, with obviously Madonna being the person that was, backing Maverick, and who was it that ran the label? I can't remember the guy's name, but he was like her manager and kind of a big deal in the industry. Freddie DeMann, that was the name of the guy who was one of the guys who ran the label, which also included like Alanis Morissette, Deftones, Candlebox, Prodigy. I mean, they had a solid group of bands, and they weren't overloaded.
Yeah, didn't they? They would have just signed Muse around this time.
Yeah.
Yep. So they did do a tour. They did some touring. And this again, I found a 1999 article from like a college paper reviewing the lineup. So the first band was some local band. It was like a punk rock band that opened. Swimmer was in the middle, and the headlining band was Fuel.
Oh my!
So you have a punk rock band and Fuel and Swimmer in between.
Hmm.
As you might guess, the crowd did not necessarily love Swimmer because they came out, and apparently James McCarran came out, and they were like full glam. Like he was wearing a tutu and admitted, like they interviewed him afterwards. He was like, that was probably not the best decision for this crowd
No.
because they kind of just were like dumbfounded as to what they were seeing. And then the Fuel people who were there for like Shimmer and whatever, alt grunge stuff that Fuel was doing in 1999, they were not having it. So I don't know if they did many more tours after that, but they were pretty much. It seems like they were done pretty quickly. I can't find a single thing on Andy McCarran after this. He wasn't in any of the bands that I can tell of. He has no other credits on Discogs. Like everybody else in the band, the guitar player, drummer, and bass player, all went on and played in other bands and did things. Some of them became like, one guy became like a session bass player, I think, or drummer. They've all kind of done different things, but he has no like internet presence whatsoever. Even just trying to find like a LinkedIn, like is he working in computer, programming or something? Like is he where the heck is he? No idea. And there was, again, I found an interview with him, and he said he had like his parents were musical, so he grew up around music, but they didn't necessarily have records when he grew up, so he basically grew up listening to the radio. And so much of his influence was just listening to like pop and alternative radio, and they just didn't buy albums where he lived. He said comedians had more influence on me in terms of like rhythm and and like how that he would study how like they would like the rhythm of their jokes and things like that. Like not necessarily, he was a big Stephen Wright fan, which I think is funny.
Random.
Yeah, very. And so yeah, interesting background, but apparently wasn't somebody who was, obsessed with being in a band from very young. He was the person who named the band. Swimmer is named after the Burt Lancaster movie The Swimmer, which I guess is sort of a psychedelic late 60s film that I have not seen, but it has sort of a cult following, I guess. So I'm guessing there was some artistic influences on the band and on him that led to him being involved with, being a lead singer and stuff like that.
Well,
so, but that's
It's a New
kind
York
of
City
it.
band. You should have a little of that mixed in.
Yeah, you should have a little artiness, and if you look at the pictures, like you have a CD, I assume, Mike. So there should be pictures inside, right? And they're like they're not dressed in like flannel with long hair. Like those guys are glammed up in various ways.
There's really not much of them, but these. So they're like model shots, I guess you could say, model headshots.
Okay, so if you go to the Discogs page for the album, there, I think this must be the promo CD. There's a shot of them. One of the guys has one of those sweaters that's just like macrame, like it has a bunch of holes in the sweater. It's not like an
That
actual
one?
that one. See,
That's behind the disc. on
oh,
the
it's
tray.
behind the disc. Okay, yeah. So you got I think the red-haired guy is Andy McCarran, and then on the left you have maybe that's Moby with the bald head and sweater. I'm not sure. And then a guy with a red sports coat covered with white stars and no shirt.
That guy looks kind of like Brian Vander Ark if he was a lot shorter.
Yeah,
like the '90s version of him.
If Brian Vander Ark was gonna join a glam rock band, that's what he'd look like. And then the guy on the right has the macrame sweater that has a bunch of holes. It looks like bats ate through most of his sweater in the closet. So what I'm saying is they weren't grunge, third generation grunge. They were clearly going for like that sort of like Lowcraft. We reviewed that album last year that had that like
Yeah.
sort of glammy influence.
Yeah.
It felt like there were some bands towards the end of the decade that were sort of incorporating or trying to reignite sort of a glam look.
For sure. Yep.
Yeah. So we did get comments over at Patreon. They were all over the place. I'm going to read through a couple of them. Adam Rogan said they certainly are heavily influenced by Our Lady Peace, both musically and vocally. I don't know influence, but they sound similar. The singer also sounds like Jeff Buckley at times. This was a fun listen. I rated it as a better EP. Darren Lehman said some cool musical ideas here and some quirky melodies and vocals. The lead singer's voice starts to wear on me over the course of the full album. I hear shades of Our Lady Peace on this album, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Richard Watersman disagreed. He said, you can't compare Rain Media to this guy. Sorry, Mike, the vocals ruined for me. It might be the lyrical content, too. It reminds me of Wheatus. Fun fact, our band opened for Wheatus one time. It's a shame because instrumentally, I like the rockier parts. Better EP. So even though Richard didn't like it as much as Adam, they both gave it the same rating. Interesting. Keith Miller said, I love this album. I've owned it for quite some time. This is one of those albums where I feel like the energy, songwriting, and music rise above the vocals. I generally hate singers in the Billy Corrigan, Rain Media, Adam Gontier. I don't know who Adam Gontier is. Vein of screeching and whining, but as I've said, I've lived with this album for a long time and I really enjoy it. He loved this album. Ian McIver, on the other hand, said this album did nothing for me, or maybe I was just more interested in the NFL playoffs. It sounded like I ordered Our Lady Peace off of Temu or Wish. Decent single. Gavin said, this was a strange experience for me. The year the album and the cover both put me back on the back foot before I started listening. Then when the singing started, I was wondering why they were dragging a dead cat down a blackboard, but slowly I started to enjoy it. The unusual vocals started to work for me, and all of a sudden, I'm at a worthy album. It's still a tough listen to take in all at once, as there is no let up in how emotional it is, but I liked it a lot. So Gavin went from really disliking it to really liking it. He went on an emotional journey on this record. That's nice to see. See, as men, we can evolve our emotions.
Yeah, you see what happens when you don't immediately reach and hit skip next track. You just kind of let the album exist and you sit with it for a minute and
there you go.
You might figure it out.
You guys have covered that a lot recently with a lot of the discussion about how music is consumed these days versus how it used to be, right?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yes, it's a very much a 30 seconds. You get 30 seconds to prove yourself and then on to the next track, sort of a way of listening now. Lastly, Willie Dillon said, this album has an interesting mix of somewhat middle of the road late 90s pop alt rock with some unusual bits thrown in that help it stand out some. The vocalist does some interesting modulating with his voice, maybe too much occasionally. At times he sounds a bit like Rain Media. There's that name again. He's pretty capable of belting it out, but I could also see his voice getting to be a bit much on repeated listens. I could probably do without Spaced Out Hat, which is one of the tracks on the album. The band seems to employ the loud, quiet, loud dynamic in quite a few songs. It's nothing revelatory, but it does add dynamics to the music. It's not going to the top of the stack, but I think it's probably a worthy album. And with 87 monthly listeners on Spotify, it would seem a shovel was certainly required in getting this on the podcast. Yes, this was definitely one to dig out with the shovel, because this is not one that this is not Green Day or Alanis Morissette or one of those huge records.
This is one of those albums that if you own it, it's very likely that it has one of those gold markings on it that says promotional use only.
Yes. Hey, that you bought it at a record store. You looked at the cover and go, that's interesting.
Pretty cool. It's 50 cents. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, when you look at the cover, it does not tell you what this is. This could be like Everything But the Girl sounding.
Yeah.
This could be a trip hop album. This could be anything. This could have been folk. It does not give you any sort of indication of what this record is going to be. And actually, I cannot find I got to find a good JPEG of the album cover, because there's not one on the internet, even on.
Right
Yeah.
behind you.
It's blurry.
No, it's blurry.
Oh,
You
Wow.
can't really
Compressed.
see. It's all compressed and blurry. Yeah, I need a cleaner. I might have to ask you to scan yours
I
on
will
your
do that for you.
on your phone, if you could send that, because unfortunately nobody's put up a good JPEG of this record anywhere, or PNG or web thing. What's that new one?
WebP.
WebP, or an Apple HEIC.
Oh,
Hayek.
we don't want that.
No.
That's
Those
way
are-
too big.
Why do they do that, by the way? Because it doesn't upload anywhere. It's so annoying. Never mind. Let's move past that. No tangents. No tangents allowed. I need a button that says no tangents, and then we can move on. Let's move on to checking out this record. Jay, tell me what works for you on Surreal by Swimmer.
Well, those comments get into a lot of it. I think what's underlying a lot of them is you got to be into the drama here. This is a band I think works best when you're in for like the big sweeping movements, the builds, the choruses that pay off, and him really going from in a lot of these verses he's using kind of a restrained head voice, and then when he gets to the choruses it's like full throated, full chest, like Axl Rose level belting. And I think that works really well. The other part of that is the guitars are pretty interesting on this record. They're very layered, a lot of effects, but I can't quite put my finger on what exactly they are. They're fairly clean, surprisingly. I think a lot of the weight on this record is actually coming from the bass. Like when they go to those big moments, as I kind of break it down and try to figure out what's going on there, it's not like they're using like these heavy, like super gang guitars that became fairly popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. They're still like pretty cleanish guitars with layers and effects, but a lot of the weight is coming from the bass, and it just, I think, really helps deliver these verses that are, again, more restrained, kind of intimate, pulling you in, a little quirky, and then when they get to the choruses, it's a kind of big release. You can definitely hear the Our Lady Peace comparisons, I think, both vocally, but also in some of the chord choices and things. I think the part about that works is he's using the vocal as an instrument. It's not always singing lines. He's singing like little whatever note sounds, the same way that Ray Maida would do a little bit. And some of those are actually the hook or hook E in these songs. So like Dumb has a little moment like that pretty early on where for me, it really grabbed me. The first song, I wasn't quite sure about this band. And then we got to that part. And when he did that little vocal thing, I don't know, it just triggered like a little in my brain, like, oh, that's different, and I sort of tuned into the record and I started to pick up on that quite a bit, in the same way that Our Lady Peace, especially in the 90s would do that in their songs, like use these little vocal noises and oohs and ahs and yelping and whatever to kind of create these little moments that are memorable in a weird way. And they're not like something you put on the lyric sheet, but like it's, using the voice as a instrument, which I think he has the range to be able to do too. Yeah, so I mean, I think general, like, you got to be in for the drama on this record. You got to want that big payoff in the chorus. I can see how, some of that is going to feel melodramatic or, a little over the top at times, but I enjoyed that kind of thing. So it worked for me. What about you, Tim? What worked?
I agree with you in the drama part. Like I think the first song sets up the record really well because it's kind of quiet, and then at the 240 mark, there's like this pause, and then you get this big explosion, and you go, oh, okay, like this is gonna be one of those kind of bands where you're gonna get like these big, massive, like sort of sections that are gonna happen, and that it does tend to happen where the tempo will sort of lull you into this kind of mid-tempo-y kind of feel a lot on the record, but then you'll get to a chorus like on Because Today has a huge chorus.
Spit out all the dizziness. Wipe your face in the bitterness. I'll be a god if you need less. If you want time. 'Cause today is already done. My guilt is overcome.
That to me is like what the band does really well is finding the right spot for that boom, that big hit, for where the drums and the guitar, especially the guitars, are just gonna like pile drive you right there. And like you said, it's not like this big overdriven Mesa Boogie crunch thing that's happening. It's more subtle than that. And that's why I mentioned Lowcraft, which, again, mentioning Lowcraft is like 99% of the people out there have no
It's
idea
not
what the heck
super
I'm
helpful.
talking about. It's not super helpful unless you've listened to that episode of the podcast. But it's using drama and the it's a weird comparison, but like the more glammy parts of like Space Hog, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
So, like you, I thought there was some really cool guitar things happening. Special Life has a really cool second guitar part in the chorus. It's very minimal, but it's just this little like 2-note picking part that comes in. That was really cool. There's a which song was it? I think it's Kicked in the Head. When that song starts, it almost sounds like it's going to go into like a shoegaze song. Like he's doing these notes, and then like the third one has this like bend where it's like, and you're like, oh, that's kind of cool. That kind of reminds me of like Ride or something, or Swerve Driver.
Mhm.
But they never lean into any particular genre. They have their sound, I guess you'd say, and they tend to stay with that sound, but just sort of pick a little bit of something here and there and integrate it into the sound. So that's the stuff that worked for me. Mike, this is your record. You brought it to us. What works for you on Surreal?
I kind of have to start this with the story of how I found this thing in the first place,
Yes, please tell us.
because I don't really know anyone that knows this record other than the person who introduced it to me. So a very long time ago, in my early 20s, I still have this very good friend named Josh, talented drummer, talented guitarist, talented songwriter. Was in a band with a bunch of my other friends. Used to hang out, your boys you hang out with. He was one of the guys that we would all go to concerts. I would go to concerts with, so saw a lot of shows with him. And one day we were hanging out, and he says, "Hey, Mike, I just heard this record that is the first time I heard it, I thought Mike is going to love this. This is right up his alley. This is exactly what he's looking for in music." And he hands me a burned copy of this album. And my first experience with it, because this is like the 90s, right, is in the car on the way back home from Columbus, where he lived. So that's an hour plus drive for me. So I got to listen to the whole thing plus more. Loved it from the first note. Loved everything about it. Listened to it over and over again. And eventually he asked for it back. So I must have spun it 50 times in the several weeks or months that I had it. And I went years without ever hearing from or seeing anything of this band again. And I can't tell you where exactly I found it, but I was in a record store somewhere and I found it and I bought it immediately after not having heard it for a long time. And so when you actually buy it and find out that it comes with like pictures and lyrics and like the whole thing that CDs used to come with back in the day when labels were putting effort into making them an artistic package, it was just nice to have it back and be able to spend time with it and not feel rushed. So I experienced this album as an album, not like the way most people listen to music today, right?
Yep.
And my first experience was there's no way that even though he's my friend, there's no way he has my musical taste that pegged. And I had to be like, I had to admit, yeah, it's what I want. And I think my relationship with this album has changed over the last 20 or so years because at the time I first got it, I could barely play my instrument. I was a novice musician. I wouldn't say that I'm a good musician today, but I kind of know what I'm doing now. And I know a lot more about how music works and structure and songwriting and playing with dynamics and tonality. And I like a lot more of the interesting things they do with the music to play with your emotions because now I understand how that works. And at the time I just felt it right as a listener, but now that I understand some of the choices they made, I appreciate it more from a songwriting standpoint. I like every song on this record. I don't think, like when I listen to it, I don't skip any. And it's not that long. It's only like, what, 11 songs? I think it's sequenced very intelligently. The last song, Halo, is a perfect song to end the record with. It just makes it feel all wrapped up, and it is a somewhat sad, yearning that, like Jay said, that emotional, the drama that is created. I never ever thought this sounded like Our Lady Peace. Rain Maida's voice, he actually is a little lower than this when he's singing in his like normal chest voice register, and he can get a lot lower than any of the songs here go. I feel like this guy is super unique, and I don't know that I've ever heard anyone that sounds like him, but I don't think he goes as low as some of the Our Lady Peace vocals can go. Yeah. Maybe because he uses a lot of falsetto, that's why a lot of folks jump to that. But I never got that feel. I think the songwriting is great. The crafting, the crafting the layers of sound that you get, especially when you listen to it on headphones and stereo, is great. And it doesn't sound old to me. I mean, it's an old record, right? 99. That's a long time ago. But I can play this now, and this still sounds like the kind of band I would go see, which is really probably the best compliment I could pay these guys. Like if I heard this today, I would check the internet to find out when they were coming because I would go see this band.
Yeah, the guitars are interesting too, in that they I think with this kind of approach, there's all these like overtones that kind of start to happen with all the delays reacting with each other. But to your point, Tim, and there are some bending, and there's some moments where there's even some twang here and there, like, ooh, what is that little bend there? It almost sounds like a little country thing going on. You get all these little, like, as you dig into the record sonically, you get all these little things that happen, I think, because of the delays they're using and stuff. Which, to your point, Tim, about the shoegaze moments, and there's definitely some spots where you're like, oh, wow, okay. I see where this is going, or this could, but they don't fully go any one of those directions. Like they kind of pull back and then settle back into like more of the song.
Yeah, this isn't an album where it's like, this is the shoegaze song, this is the punk rock song, this is that song. It's like there are just little hints of things, but everything sounds like them, which is, that's a tough thing to do, to find your voice as a songwriter and as a band on the first record, especially when, I mean, they hadn't even been together for, I don't think, more than 2 years before this. So to get this all assembled, that's a tough thing to do.
Think you're demented. You're messed up. Think your brain's deserted. And all your thoughts are dead. Send out for Jesus. He can save your face.
Is there anything that doesn't work for you on the record, Jack?
I'm gonna disagree on the way the album starts. I think you guys seem like you like the way it got going, and it was maybe closer to what Gavin was experiencing when I first heard his head voice and just that extreme nasally delivery, and it also taking so long to get to the big moment. It's set up a bit of a roller coaster experience for this record for me. I immediately, you spend 2 solid minutes like, okay, well, this is what the band is, I guess. This guy's going to sing like this for 11 songs. And, I'm not sure this is going to pay off in anything interesting. And then it kind of does. And then you start to hear him sing in so many different ways. I mean, he has a lot of different voices on this record.
Mm-hmm.
So then it took me a while to kind of process the various ways that he sings and delivers and really try to figure out like, well, what aspects of this do I like? What's working vocally? What isn't? So it just took me, I think maybe because of the sequencing combined with just that heavy use of, that head voice in the verses, it's just polarizing. I can see a lot of people like initially hearing that and thinking like, oh boy, this, like, I think Gavin said, like, it sounds like a dying cat for a minute. You're like, wow, this is a lot. And then as you get in the record, you're like, oh no, that's super cool. And now I see how the pieces can fit together. And like on listen 3, 4, I starts to lock together, but I still find myself more attracted to the choruses, and maybe wishing either he'd pull back a little bit on his delivery in the verses, or like they'd vary the verses up maybe a little bit more and not always do the verses so quiet and intimate, do some that are a little bit more open and louder, and, he can use some of the different voices that he's capable of in the verses too. So that's the only thing that didn't work for me. What about you, Tim?
Well, the vocal, I think leading off with "It Sounds Like Rain Media," like a lot of people have, I think that's the wrong thing. Like Mike said, it's just not in the right range. So I think it's setting the Andy McCarran up to fail if you're thinking like this is going to be like Our Lady Peace. Honestly, the vocal didn't bother me except for one song, "It's So Perfect," because him and the rhythm section are locked in together. Bump, 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 bump. And I'm like, please play off of each other. Please counter each other. Like, do something just a little bit different in the verse. If you do that the first time, the second time through the verse, you should change it up. Add a counter melody. Do something. I was disappointed in that because they do a lot of things that they change up. And so I was just like, that was like the thorn in my side for this album, was that song. Other than that, I was putting my producer hat on and going, man, I would have loved a little piano right there. I would have loved a little tinkling piano, a nice Hammond right there. Just a little touch of organ in the background would have given this a nice feel. So if anything, I wish they were a little more adventurous in the glammy end of things. They used cello on Spaced Out Hat, and that was the most predictable song to use it on, is the slow ballady song.
I'm so tired, I don't know where I'm
Give me the cello on Dirty Word. Give me the cello on, you know, a faster song on Dumb or something. That's give me or a string part, a violin or something. I kept hearing parts in my head going, oh, if they just put this one thing there, that would have been killer. That, and I just feel like there could have been a lot more playfulness with the vocal. Like, not that his vocals are bad, I just would have liked to have heard him let loose a little bit more in terms of, he does a lot of, you know, vocalizing. And, you know, Rain Media, that's the comparison, you know, Rain Media, he does a lot of like stuff like that.
That's what I was trying to get at earlier. Vocalizing is a good way to put it.
I don't necessarily need that. I just wanted like a little more just I don't know how to say, weirdness with the vocal, whether that's putting effects on the vocal, like run it through a vibrato or a distorted mic sound or something. Just give me some like weirdness, so that I think this album sits mostly between like 70 and 80 BPM for the most part. Like, it feels very mid-tempo, but I think you can get away with that if you make each song distinct through individual choices. And that was the only thing that I think was lacking on this, is that most of the songs have the same arrangement in terms of they're just guitar, vocal, bass, drums. And occasionally you get one or two things that are out of that setup, but not for the most part. And I'm sure, you know, it's a debut record. I don't know what their budget was like. I don't know if they could bring in a string section. I don't know if they could hire somebody to play Hammond organ or do all those things. They might not have had that. You might have time constraints or whatever. Someday I'm just going to sit down with all the records that I want to play producer on. I'm just going to put them in my garage band. And I'm going to play all the parts that I think are missing. But that was it. Like, I don't feel like there's anything inherently like terrible on the record, but it's like I want to write like B-. You could have worked harder on this paper type of thing from the teacher. Like, this is a really good second draft. You're really close to the final draft. Just give me one more version of this.
Let me refine your angle there. So I could also see going further and weirder with the guitars.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that'd be another way that could be interesting. Even though, you know, I talked about the guitars. I think they're super interesting and effective. I could also hear a version of this that would be really compelling, that the guitars go even further. They're louder. They're more extreme. They do weirder stuff. You know, his voice maybe takes half a step back. That could be a really cool album.
They needed a Johnny Greenwood on the guitar.
Yes.
Like, I want that vibrato guitar from Planet Telex to come in. You know, that dun, 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 like, just to give me a different rhythm feel from something else. Or one song that has an insane solo that's all over the place, like One Man Army by Our Lady Peace has a great, really dissonant, weird solo. I just needed like just one of those. It doesn't have to be on the record. You don't have to show off on every song, but just give me one or two of those where I can go, oh, this is the song that's got that killer solo. That was just the only thing I was missing. Mike, is there anything that doesn't work for you on this record? You've been listening to this for 20 years. I'm sure that you've got two things. Okay.
First, can I just say how much I appreciate Mike Turner? Our Lady Peace was never the same after he left that band.
100%.
That dude was awesome. He's probably still awesome, actually. I don't know what he's been up to. And you were mentioning the string arrangements. There are a lot of strings in the last track, Halo. And I thought, because so you can't see it, but the type in the minor notes is really small. And now the older I get, the harder it is for me to actually see it. But
I feel
it's
you.
like it's really hard to read. But it does say string arrangements and keyboards, and there's a guy. Now that makes me think that they just did it all on keys instead of having an actual string section.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm.
This is probably before any of the MIDI stuff was good enough to sound close, right?
Yeah.
So maybe they use some kind of synthy stuff for it. So the things I would do to this record to make it, I mean, again, it's right up my alley. I'm a bass player. I just want more of it. It just doesn't feel prominent enough for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like just a couple of weeks ago, you reviewed the Papa Vegas record, which I love the way the bass sounds on that. Give me that bass tone and put it in this, and then I'm a happy dude. Also, I didn't notice this on the first gazillion listens, but when I finally got around to reading the lyrics and the liner notes, they're not the greatest lyrics. Now I can forgive that because I feel like if you write a good enough song, nobody cares.
Right.
First, we've established we have a lot of folks in the DMO community that don't even listen to the lyrics in the first place. But even with bad lyrics, if your hook is strong enough, people will sing them. Ask Noel Gallagher, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, some of these songs I've been singing, and then I think that's not a very good lyric. So that could use some work, but that's being really, really nitpicky.
Your comment on the bass, I think as I analyzed the sound a little bit more as it got big, I started to realize like, oh, that isn't the guitar that's big. I'm just hearing the bass now. There's something about the tone they're using it's actually more in a guitar-ish range rather than a big, bass sound.
Yep.
Yeah, I did make a note that sometimes it was hard to distinguish between the bass because the bass isn't necessarily doing a lot of crazy stuff. It's pretty much locked into whatever the rhythm on the guitar is doing. So you get like a sort of a combination of bass and guitar in one sound.
Yep.
So this came out in 99, right? And this comes out on Maverick. They did release a single. Dirty Word, track 4, was the single that they put out. That's not the one I would have picked.
I mean, it's catchy, but I figured that it would have been something like Playing Jesus, maybe? I guess you can't have Can you have a single about Jesus in the 90s? I'm trying to think of something that starts.
Well, yeah, I mean,
bigger,
Joan
right?
Osborne,
Yeah.
you could get away with that.
Toadies had the "So Help Me Jesus" song, so yeah, I guess you could. Maybe Special Life seems singly to me, but I don't think it's one of the better choruses on the record. It just starts bigger. Right? When I think single, I think radio wants people to like latch onto the song right away, right?
Right. I guess I don't know, like maybe Dumb has a big chorus, and if you did the right video with it, but I guess that's the trouble with this record is like there's not a clear huge single for 1999.
No.
Because you look and you mentioned Muse, like you go back to that first Muse record, Muscle Museum, yeah, that's a clear single. Sunburn, Sober, those are all like very clear radio songs with big chorus hooks. And this is a little bit more it's because of the fact that he it's funny because Matthew Bellamy gets that tag of sounding like Jeff Buckley and Tom York, who do a lot of vocalization, like who do a lot of like mush-mouthy kind of stuff at times where they're like that kind of thing. And I guess it would be hard to pin this band down in 99. I think you'd have a hard time selling it to a radio programmer. Like what the big, especially with that being the single that they chose. Like if you send this to modern rock radio 99, is this going to go up against what's big then? Probably not.
I think some of the choruses can. I'm mulling your comment, Mike, about the intros here. A lot of these
Dirty
songs
Word
don't.
has a really cool groove to it.
Yeah.
I feel that somebody should should cover that, but like in the style of like a now pop song, because I think if you use kind of like where modern pop music is at, I think that's probably a hit. If you really emphasize the kind of danceable groove it has. I mean, it's got the word hater in '99. That wasn't like a word a lot of people were using back then, right? Ahead of its time.
That was ahead of its time. Although there was a band called Hater in the '90s, so I guess they that wasn't too revolutionary. Can you guys hear the dogs barking behind me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Just want to make sure that you can hear the cacophony of dog because it's feeding time. So they're all like, "Give us the food now!" Even though it happens at 5 o'clock or 5:30 every day for their entire lives. I don't know why they have to get so wound up.
It's very exciting.
Very exciting to be kept alive. Anyway, let's get into our overall ratings on this album. We'll share the poll results shortly, but Jay, where do you land? Worthy album, better EP, or decent single?
I'm at a worthy album. I think it's distinctive enough that it's worth a listen. I think it, if you're into a lot of the bands we talked about and this type of sound, there's not a lot of records like this, so it's probably worth checking out. It's not a perfect album. I think we've talked about some things that can make it better. And I don't know that I still don't love Surreal. I maybe would like change the sequencing a little bit. I don't know that I would cut any songs, but maybe there's a way to sequence it a little differently and or like just revisit some of the intros here. There's a lot of like starting slow and they get to the chorus is fairly quick, but there's just this moment, there's this first minute of the song where, I need to give me a big hook, give me something to grab me and make sure I'm paying attention. So some things that could be improved, but I think it's a worthy album. Where'd you land, Tim?
I'm at an EP. I feel like because of the sort of similarity in structure and tempo between some of these songs, that there's a little bit of repetitiveness on that end. So you could get away with basically like half the record, and then the other half of the record kind of duplicates the effort. And if there was a little bit more differentiation between the songs, I'd probably bump it up to more of a worthy album. But as it stands, I'm kind of at an EP here. I think that came up in the comments. Like number of people mentioned better EP. So that's where I'm at. Mike.
What would be on your EP?
I would go with Surreal, Dumb, Because Today, Dirty Word, Sick Friend, and Halo. And basically from It's So Perfect to Spaced Out Hat. Like that to me is like everything that's in that section I've heard in other songs. So you would need to do something really different. Or just add some more layers to give it some individuality. That's what I'm missing. So 6 songs out of the 11, which I mean, again, this is a fairly respectable 43-minute record in 1999. That's not common. Like they could have easily thrown 15 songs on here and we'd be talking about a much different record. So I do appreciate that.
Ooh, thank God for that.
Yes. What about you, Mike? Where do you land?
I think it's a worthy album. Here's something I think is interesting about the things that collectively we did like. None of it's really about the songwriting. It's all about what to do with the songs after they're done being written, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stuff that we would like to see a little differently is about things like vocal approach and arrangements and production choices. And I think that's interesting. And the reason I say worthy album is I think the songs are good. And I think for any record, that's where you got to start. Are the songs good? And the rest of it, you can, especially the older I get, I can see ways in which you can do other things when what you're starting with. It's a well-written song. Yeah, the songs still hold up for me. I still enjoy listening to this. I don't listen to it nearly as often as I used to, but I'm glad I actually found a real one instead of that bootleg CD I was, or not bootleg, burned CD from my
Right.
friend. I wonder if he ever found the real one.
Did you have a different like mental image of the band? I don't know. When I listen to music, it's very visual for me. So I can imagine like getting something on CDR, really liking it, not knowing who the band is or what they look like or anything about them, and then getting the CD. And was that sort of eye-opening to you? Did it ruin the experience at all, or did
No, I thought it was four white guys, and it turns out it's four white guys.
Well, what do you know?
And I have probably I'm going to have a different perspective on this than you, but I grew up loving rock and roll in the 90s and going to shows and being the only person at the show that looks like me, and not seeing a lot of people who look like me doing the playing either.
Right.
So after a while, you kind of get over it. I mean, I was still very uncomfortable going to a rock show just because I'm one black guy here. Hope nothing goes down, But I thought the songs were good on the first listen, but I thought it was just your typical four white guy band. And when I got the album, it turned out that they indeed were. Now, what flavor of white guy I didn't really know or pay attention to, but yeah.
Strawberry or blueberry or raspberry, exactly.
Yeah.
Pecan, moose tracks.
I actually need to turn the blur off because I think the pictures in here are actually interesting, and I'm wondering who at the label decided to do the whole H-O-L-E.
The surreal approach to the pictures.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe that's what they were going for, is
a little surrealism,
channeling their inner Magritte.
Yes. There you go. Well, over at Patreon, they agreed with you two. 56% were the album, 33% better EP, and 11% decent single. So you guys win, and I take the flogging this week. So commence the flogging.
Loser.
I'll
try harder next time.
I will. Mike, thank you for bringing this. This is a perfect Dig Me Out episode in the sense that we would never have heard this record, nor would most of our Patreon or listening community have heard this record without you bringing to us. And I think some people have found some stuff that they like now. So if Andy McCarran would like to tell us what he's up to, maybe he went to Mars or something. I don't know, but he there's nothing out there, no social media, nothing. So maybe he's a poet in France. I have no idea. But thank you for bringing this to us.
Thanks for letting me talk about music. I love it.
Absolutely.
You guys are great, by the way.
Thank you.
This is a classic Dig Me Out selection.
Yes. And I want to remind folks, if you want to be like Mike, you can join us at Patreon by going to dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. Join the union. You get to vote in the polls like this. You get to vote in the polls for our roundtables, for our aughts episodes, for our 80s metal episodes. Get access to the Discord, get stickers, all kinds of cool stuff. And if you want to suggest a record that goes into one of our polls, you can do so by going to digmeoutpodcast.com. That's the mothership of Dig Me Out. And that's where you can throw in a suggestion for our 80s metal podcast and the 90s rock podcast. All of them end up in a big hopper, and Jay uses some sort of algorithm to determine.
I sort by date.
He sorts by date. Well, dates are an algorithm, I think.
Yeah.
Are they not?
Of course.
They're the Mayan algorithm. Or whoever invented the calendar.
True.
I think it was the Mayans. That's also at digmeoutpodcast.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. It comes out every week with histories of the bands that we talk about that are in our polls and a release calendar of new albums, books, documentaries, TV shows, etc. for 70s, 80s, 90s, and aughts relevant music. Yes, we've now added the 70s because we have done a 70s record not too long ago. And so if Jackson Brown's got a new record, we're going to include it. I don't know if he's still active or not. If the Partridge Family have a new record out, we'll be covering it.
I'm trying to see. I don't think we got this week. The closest would be Wire. They were late 70s.
Yeah. Their bass no, I don't know if he was a bass player, but one of the guys from Wire put out a solo record this week. So
Edvard Graham Lewis.
Yes.
And then all the others are 80s and 90s.
Yep. So
Nice.
like I said, we cover everything. And lastly, Apple Podcasts. It's one of the places you can go to leave positive feedback for the program. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Dig Me Out.
Sure.